While there is constant talk of mercy and dialogue, many faithful remain alone, without guidance, their cries ignored. Today, a French layman, Christian Marquand, forcefully denounces the marginalization of Catholics devoted to the traditional Mass. Stay with us until the end, because this appeal will have an impact on the future of the Church. In today's Church, we are witnessing a paradox that cannot leave us indifferent. On the one hand, official calls for dialogue, synodality, and mutual listening are multiplying, presented as essential traits of Christian charity. On the other hand, however, the exclusion of those faithful who remain attached to the traditional liturgy of the Roman Rite is evidently growing. It is Christian Marquand himself, a French layman and president of the organizing committee of the Summorum Pontificum pilgrimage, who openly denounced this contradiction in an interview given on September 23rd to Pays liturgique.fr. Marquand speaks bluntly of a plan to silence Roman Rite Catholics, a movement that is not new, but which, according to him, has gained momentum in the last 4 years. Thus, while on paper, dialogue is preached as an essential tool of ecclesial life, in reality, the doors are closed to those who ask to be heard. Christian Marquand recalls how, in the past, even in a context that wasn't always easy, it was still possible to maintain real and direct contact with church authorities. Today, however, this possibility seems to have disappeared. He emphasizes that the enemies of liturgical peace have always been active, but especially in the last 4 years, there has been a more severe turn of events. Previously, even without illusions of perfect harmony, an authentic engagement with Rome was still possible, useful at least to ensure that the voice of the faithful attached to the traditional Mass was not completely ignored. With these words, Marquand suggests that the current climate is not simply cold or detached, but is marked by a programmatic closure that silences entire communities of the baptized. To better explain the difference with the current situation, Marquand recalls a specific period in the life of the Church. From 1988 to 2019, the Ecclesia Dei Commission operated in Rome, established after the episcopal consecrations performed by Monsignor Marcel Lefebvre. According to him, that reality represented an authentic space for dialogue, in which it was possible to exchange ideas with seriousness and respect. During those years, he says, he had the opportunity to be received by all the prefects of the Dicastery for Divine Worship, from Cardinal Jorge Medina Esteves to Francis Arinze, Antonio Canizares, and Robert Sara, who left the post in 2021. These meetings, although not without difficulties, nevertheless constituted a concrete and recognized channel of communication, a sign that the Church had not completely given up on treating traditional believers as a living part of its body. However, with the end of Cardinal Sarah's mandate and the arrival of his successor, Cardinal Arthur Roche, the situation changed. Marquand explains that he never managed to secure a meeting with him, despite numerous attempts. He says he sent letters and emails several times and visited the ministry's offices quite frequently, always without success. The only response received was a total lack of response, justified by the fact that Cardinal Roche was very busy. An attitude that, in Marquand's reading, does not appear to be a simple question of a full agenda, but rather as the sign of a rubber wall erected to prevent any direct contact with those representing the world of traditional liturgy. For Marquand, this closure isn't just a personal disappointment, but a wound for an entire community of believers. He describes the situation with a powerful image. We are like orphans. In the Roman dicasteries, he explains, there is often talk of traditional liturgy and those who practice it, but without any real knowledge of the people involved or direct meetings. In other words, they are discussed as if they were external objects, without ever having established a living human relationship. It is this disconnect between theoretical discourse and the lack of concrete listening that, according to him, makes the current situation dramatic. The contradiction becomes even more evident if one considers the official language of the Church today. Marquand observes that just as dialogue is insisted upon everywhere as an indispensable form of charity, the faithful, attached to the traditional Mass, are systematically excluded from any discussion. It's a striking paradox. The word dialogue is repeated like a mantra, but in reality, it becomes a privilege reserved for a few, while other Catholics are ignored as if they didn't exist. The same thing happens at synods, both at the diocesan level and in Rome. Marquand complains that assemblies are multiplying, but those tied to tradition are never invited. The result is a sort of forced invisibility. There is talk of inclusion and universal listening, but in reality there is a specific segment of the Catholic population that is kept out of every discussion. The image that emerges is that of a dialogue that is growing in quantity but is emptied of truth because it ignores precisely the most inconvenient voices. To confirm this exclusion, Marquand cites the Synod of the Diocese of Versailles. According to him, on that occasion, many groups had asked to participate in the proceedings, but the response was a complete refusal. No one was admitted. An emblematic episode that, in his opinion, would be enough to fill an entire book. The Versailles experience thus becomes a concrete example of how, behind the facade of synodality, lies a rigid selection that excludes those who are not perfectly aligned with the dominant positions. This is where the harshest accusation arises. The dialogue advocated by ecclesiastical authorities is not universal but reserved only for those who already share the same vision. Marquand sums it up in lapidary words. Dialogue exists only with those who, broadly speaking, think like them. It is therefore not a genuine confrontation, but a closed conversation, which serves to confirm decisions already made and to exclude any dissenting voices. Despite the clarity of his denunciations, it is likely that this cry too will remain unanswered, as has already happened to so many other voices coming from the world linked to the traditional liturgy. Yet the silence cannot last forever. Systematically ignoring a living part of God's people means fueling tensions that sooner or later will result in visible fractures. If the supreme authority, Leo, who should lead with firmness and justice, does not take a stand, division will become inevitable, not by the will of the faithful, but by the stubbornness of those who have chosen not to listen to them. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.